I've built systems. I've solved problems most people wouldn't even see. I've taken ideas from nowhere and made them real. But there's one thing I've never let myself do: speak about her. Not publicly. Not even to most people who know me. I kept it locked. Private. Sacred. Like if I said her name out loud, the weight of it would somehow change what we had. Or maybe I was just afraid. Afraid that putting words to something so real would make it vulnerable to a world that doesn't understand silence as protection. But silence has its cost too. It builds walls when you meant to build boundaries. It creates distance when all you wanted was to hold something close. So here I am, breaking my own rule. Not because I need to prove anything, not because the world asked for it, but because some truths, if you hold them too long, they start to hold you. And I'm tired of being held. I never told anyone because I didn't think they'd understand. Not really. People see what you build. They see the output, the wins, the momentum. They don't see the one person who sits with you when the noise stops, when the notifications fade and the room goes quiet, and you're left with the raw version of yourself. The one you don't post about? That version? She knew it. And I never said a word about her because I didn't want the world to reduce what we had into content, into commentary, into something that could be analyzed or judged by people who've never felt what it's like to be fully seen. But here's what nobody told me. Silence doesn't just protect, it isolates. It makes you think you're guarding something precious, when really, you're just building a cage around your own capacity to express love. I thought keeping her private meant keeping her safe. But what I didn't realize is that I was also keeping myself from learning how to speak about love without fear, how to honor something real without apologizing for it, how to say she matters without waiting for permission from a world that doesn't give it. You know that feeling when you finally say something you've been holding for years? That first word, it doesn't come out smooth. It cracks. It hesitates. It sounds nothing like you imagined it would, because you've rehearsed it in your head so many times that when it finally leaves your mouth, it feels foreign. That's where I am right now, breaking years of my own conditioning. And if I sound uncertain, it's because I am. But uncertainty doesn't mean it's wrong. Sometimes it just means it's real. She wasn't loud. She didn't demand attention. She didn't need to be the center of anything. And maybe that's why I kept her there, in the center of my life, but outside of my words. I didn't want her compared to anyone. I didn't want her turned into a symbol or a story people could project onto. I wanted her to stay untouched by opinions that didn't matter. But the cost of that? I never learned how to celebrate her out loud. I never practiced gratitude in a way that could be witnessed. And that did something to me. It taught me to love in the shadows, to feel deeply but express carefully, to believe that real love doesn't need language. And that's when everything I believed fell apart. Because love without expression isn't protection, it's erosion. It's the slow, quiet way you lose the ability to show someone they matter before they're gone. It's the way you convince yourself that they know when maybe they don't. Maybe they needed to hear it. Maybe I needed to say it. Not for the world, for me, for her, for the version of us that existed beyond my fear of exposure. I'm not talking about posting everything. I'm not saying broadcast your private life like it's a product. I'm saying there's a difference between discretion and suppression, between protecting something and suffocating it. I thought I was being intentional. Turns out, I was just being afraid. Afraid of being misunderstood. Afraid of being vulnerable in a way I couldn't control. Afraid that if I spoke about her, I'd somehow lose the version of her that existed only for me. But here's the shift. The version of her that exists only for me isn't the full truth. She's not a secret. She's not a concept I get to guard like intellectual property. She's a human being who deserved to be honored, not hidden. And I'm the one who chose silence because I thought it made me wise, mature, private. When really, it just made me scared. Have you ever done that? Loved someone so much that you convinced yourself the world didn't deserve to know? That your relationship was too pure, too real, too different to be shared? I did, and I wore that silence like a badge, like it proved I wasn't like everyone else, like I understood something deeper. But all it proved is that I didn't trust myself to speak about love without losing it. Wait before you scroll. Hear this. The moment I started to break that silence, something in me unlocked. Not because people needed to know, but because I needed to practice being honest about what I feel. I needed to stop pretending that keeping everything internal made me stronger. It didn't. It made me isolated. It made me believe that love was something you protect by keeping it small, quiet, contained. But love isn't fragile. My fear was. She used to ask me questions I didn't know how to answer. Not because I didn't have thoughts. I always have thoughts. But because I didn't have the language yet. I could talk about systems, strategy, vision. But when it came to us, I'd go quiet. Not cold, just careful. Like I was afraid one wrong word would break the thing I cared about most. And she never pushed. She just waited. And I think that's what hurt the most when I look back. She was patient with my silence. And I mistook that patience for permission to stay quiet forever. But silence isn't neutral. It's a choice. Every day I didn't speak about her was a day I chose fear over expression, privacy over presence. And I'm not saying I regret protecting what we had. I'm saying I regret not learning how to honor it out loud while it was still here. While I still had the chance to say, this matters. She matters. And I'm not afraid to let that be known. So why now? Why break the silence today? Because I finally realized something. The people who misunderstand will misunderstand no matter what you do. And the people who get it, they don't need you to perform. They just need you to be honest. And I'm done performing. I'm done curating my words to avoid judgment. I'm done pretending that silence equals strength. It doesn't. Expression does. Vulnerability does. Saying I loved her, even when your voice shakes, that's strength. This isn't about her anymore. Not entirely. It's about me learning to be the kind of person who doesn't hide what matters, who doesn't wait for the perfect moment to finally speak, who doesn't need the world to understand before I say what's true. Because the truth is this. I never spoke about her because I thought I was protecting something sacred. What I was really doing was protecting myself from exposure, from vulnerability, from the possibility that people might see me as something other than logical, controlled, put together. And maybe that's the real reason we stay silent about love. Not because it's too precious to share, but because sharing it means admitting we're not bulletproof, that we need someone, that we chose someone, that we're human in a way that can't be optimized or explained away. And for someone like me, someone who's spent years building systems and solving problems, that kind of human messiness felt like a liability. But it's not. It's the whole point. I used to think the strongest people were the ones who needed the least, who could stand alone, who didn't broadcast their feelings because they didn't need validation from anyone. I built my whole identity around that. Self-sufficient, independent, emotionally controlled. And then she came into my life and quietly dismantled every assumption I had about strength. Not by challenging me, not by asking me to change, just by existing in a way that made my walls feel unnecessary. And that terrified me more than anything I'd ever built or lost. Here's what I learned. When you meet someone who makes you feel safe enough to be yourself, your first instinct isn't always gratitude. Sometimes it's resistance. Because if you've spent years building armor, the idea of taking it off, even for someone you trust, feels like giving up a part of your identity. Like admitting you were wrong about what made you strong. I didn't want to need her. I didn't want to be the kind of person whose mood shifted based on whether she texted back or whether we had plans that night. I thought that made me weak, dependent, less capable of standing on my own. But that's not what happened. She didn't make me weaker. She made me more human. And I hated that at first. Because being human meant feeling things I couldn't optimize. It meant caring about something I couldn't control. It meant waking up some mornings and realizing that no amount of logic or planning could protect me from the possibility of loss. And for someone who spent his entire life trying to engineer certainty, that uncertainty was unbearable. So I did what I do best. I compartmentalized. I kept her in one part of my life and everything else in another. Work was work. Vision was vision. And she was separate. Sacred, yes, but also isolated. I told myself I was protecting her from the chaos, from the pressure, from the noise that comes with being associated with someone who operates at scale. But really, I was protecting myself from having to integrate the two, from having to admit that the person I was with her the softer, quieter, more uncertain version, was just as real as the person everyone else saw.
Sold.
Tell me, have you ever loved someone and kept them at a distance at the same time? Not physically, emotionally, where you let them in just far enough to feel close, but not far enough to actually disrupt your system? I did that for longer than I want to admit. And the worst part is, I thought I was doing it right. I thought boundaries meant separation, that love meant keeping things contained so they didn't interfere with purpose. I was wrong. Love doesn't interfere with purpose. It clarifies it, but only if you let it. Only if you stop treating it like a variable you need to manage and start treating it like the foundation everything else is built on. I didn't understand that then. I thought purpose was about vision, about execution, about impact. And it is. But without love, without connection, without someone who reminds you why any of it matters, purpose becomes hollow. It becomes performance. You keep moving because you don't know how to stop, not because you're actually going somewhere that matters. And that's when everything I believed fell apart. Again, I was sitting with her one night. Nothing special, no big conversation, just presence. And she looked at me and said something I'll never forget. She said, "You don't have to be on all the time." And I didn't know how to respond, because I didn't know how to not be on. I didn't know how to just exist without optimizing, or analyzing, or planning the next move. I didn't know how to be still. And she saw that. She saw the exhaustion I was hiding, the weight of constantly performing even when no one was watching. And she didn't try to fix it. She just made space for it. And that broke something in me, in the best way. But here's what I didn't do. I didn't talk about it. Not with her, not with anyone. I just felt it, absorbed it, and moved on. Because that's what I'd trained myself to do. Process internally. Keep moving. Don't dwell. And I thought that made me resilient, but all it did was teach me to experience love without actually letting it change me. To feel gratitude without expressing it. To be impacted without being transformed. And that's not strength. That's avoidance. Look at me for a second. If there's someone in your life right now who makes you feel seen, who makes the noise stop, who reminds you that you're more than your output, have you told them? Not in a casual way, not in a "you know I care about you" way, but in a way that actually costs you something, in a way that requires you to be vulnerable, to say, "You changed me, you make me better, and I don't know what I'd do without you." Have you said that? Or are you like I was, assuming they know, hoping it's enough, avoiding the discomfort of actually naming what they mean to you? I know you felt it last night, when everything went quiet and you were left alone with your thoughts. That pull, that realization that maybe you've been guarding your heart so carefully that you forgot how to let someone actually hold it. I've been there. I'm still there some days. Because unlearning years of self-protection doesn't happen overnight. It's a practice. And some days you fail. Some days you retreat back into silence because it feels safer. But safe isn't the same as right. And I'm done choosing safe over real. She never asked me to speak about her publicly. She never needed that. But I think she needed me to speak about her to her. To stop assuming she knew. To stop relying on actions alone when words mattered too. Because here's the thing about love. It's not just about what you do. It's about what you say, how you name it, how you honor it out loud so that the person you love knows they're not imagining it, that it's real, that it matters, that they matter. And I failed at that more times than I succeeded. But here's what nobody told me. You can fail at love and still be trying. You can mess up the words, miss the moments, retreat into silence when you should have stayed present and still be someone who loves deeply. The difference is whether you learn from it, whether you let the failure teach you something, whether you use the regret as fuel to do better, say more, show up differently. I didn't always do that, but I'm doing it now, and that's all I have. The willingness to break my own patterns, to say the things I used to keep inside, to honor what mattered even if I'm years too late. Some feelings don't need words. I used to believe that. I used to think that if the love was real, it would be obvious, that words were just decoration, optional, nice to have but not necessary. And maybe that's true for some people, but for me, for her, words mattered. And my silence, no matter how well intentioned, created a gap, a space where doubt could grow, where uncertainty could creep in, where she might have wondered if I felt as deeply as she did. And that's on me. Not because I didn't feel it, but because I didn't say it. You know exactly what I mean. You've been there, you've loved someone, and assumed your actions were enough. That showing up was the same as saying it. That consistency was the same as clarity. And maybe it was. Or maybe you're just telling yourself that because it's easier than admitting you were afraid. Afraid of being too much, too intense, too vulnerable. Afraid that saying I love you and the full weight of what that means would somehow make you lose control, lose power, lose the version of yourself you worked so hard to build. I don't have the answers. I'm not here to tell you how to love, or when to speak, or what the right balance is between privacy and expression. I'm just here to tell you what I learned. That silence is expensive, that protection can become prison, that the people who matter deserve to know they matter, not just through what you do, but through what you're willing to say, even when your voice shakes, even when it feels too vulnerable, even when you're not sure you'll get the words right. Because the truth is this: you won't always get the words right. You'll stumble. You'll overcorrect. You'll say too much or too little. You'll regret the timing or the phrasing or the way it landed. But that's still better than never saying it at all. That's still better than looking back and realizing you love someone fully, but never let them hear it in your voice. Never let them feel the weight of it in real time. Never gave them the gift of knowing, without question, without doubt, that they were the one thing you didn't want to lose. I think we're taught the wrong lessons about love. We're told to play it cool, to not be too available, to maintain mystery, to never let someone see how much they actually affect you, because that's somehow giving them power. And for years, I bought into that. I thought emotional restraint was sophistication, that the person who cared less won, that vulnerability was a currency you spent carefully, sparingly, only when absolutely necessary. And then I realized something that changed everything. The person who cares less doesn't win. They just lose slower. She never played games. She was direct in a way that made me uncomfortable at first. If she wanted to see me, she said it. If something bothered her, she named it. If she was happy, you knew. And I remember thinking that was risky, that she was giving too much too soon, that she'd end up hurt because she didn't know how to protect herself the way I did. But I was wrong. She wasn't unprotected. She was just unafraid. And there's a massive difference between those two things. Being unafraid doesn't mean you don't get hurt. It means you don't let the fear of getting hurt stop you from showing up fully, from saying what you mean, from loving without a backup plan. I had backup plans for everything: emotional exit strategies, ways to minimize damage if things fell apart. I thought that made me smart, strategic. But all it did was keep me half in. And you can't build something real when you're only half in. You can't ask someone to trust you fully when you're already planning how to leave. Wait before you close this. Ask yourself, are you all in with the person you love? Or are you hedging, keeping one foot out the door just in case? Protecting yourself from a future hurt by withholding presence now? I did that for longer than I'm proud of. And the cost wasn't just her trust. It was my own capacity to experience love fully, to be present without calculating risk, to give without keeping score. And that's the thing about emotional withholding. It doesn't protect you from pain. It just guarantees you'll never experience the full depth of connection. I started noticing patterns in how I communicated. When she'd say something vulnerable, I'd respond with logic. When she'd express a need, I'd offer a solution instead of presence. When she'd open up about fear or insecurity, I'd try to fix it instead of just holding space for it. And I thought I was being helpful, supportive. But what I was really doing was avoiding my own discomfort with emotional intensity. Because if I turned everything into a problem to solve, I didn't have to sit in the feeling. I didn't have to be uncertain. I could stay in control. But love isn't a problem to solve. It's an experience to be in. And every time I tried to optimize it or manage it or turn it into something I could understand through frameworks, I missed the point entirely. The point was never to figure her out. It was to be with her, to let the uncertainty exist, to stop trying to engineer a guaranteed outcome, and just trust that showing up fully, consistently, honestly, was enough. And that's when everything I believed fell apart for the third time, because I realized I'd been treating love like a project, like something I could master if I just studied it hard enough, if I read the right books, if I understood psychology deeply enough, if I optimized my communication. But love doesn't work like that. You can't master another human being. You can't predict them. You can't reduce them to patterns and inputs and expected outputs. And the moment you try, you lose the very thing that made them matter in the first place: their humanity, their complexity, their ability to surprise you. She surprised me constantly, not in dramatic ways, in small ones. The way she'd remember something I mentioned in passing weeks ago. The way she'd show up when I didn't ask but needed someone. The way she'd call me out when I was being avoidant without making it a fight. The way she'd sit in silence with me and make it feel like enough. And I didn't know how to honor that. I didn't know how to say, "You see me in ways I don't even see myself, and that means everything to me." So I said nothing. I just felt it and hoped that was sufficient. Have you ever done that? Felt something so big that you didn't trust yourself to put it into words? So you just held it, carried it, let it live inside you without ever giving it shape or sound? I thought that was depth. I thought that was what it meant to be a private person. But really, it was just fear, dressed up as preference. Fear that if I said it out loud, it would become too real, too vulnerable, too much to take back if things changed. But things change anyway. Whether you speak or stay silent, nothing stays the same. People grow, circumstances shift. What felt certain becomes uncertain. And the only question is whether you showed up fully while you had the chance. Whether you said the things that mattered. Whether the person you loved knew, without doubt, that they weren't imagining what you felt, that it was real, that they were seen, that they mattered in a way that didn't require them to guess or interpret or hope they were reading you right. I didn't give her that certainty as often as I should have. I gave her consistency. I gave her reliability. I gave her a version of love that was steady but quiet. And maybe that was enough for her. But it wasn't enough for me. Because I know what I felt. And I know the gap between what I felt and what I expressed. And that gap haunts me. Not because I didn't love her, but because I didn't trust myself to love her out loud. Don't deny it. You've been there too. You've loved someone deeply and still held back. Still kept a part of yourself locked. Still waited for them to prove something before you gave them everything. And maybe you had reasons. Maybe you'd been hurt before. Maybe you learned early that full vulnerability gets punished, that people leave, that nothing lasts. So you protect yourself by staying a little bit distant even when you're physically close, even when you're committed, even when you're all in. You're not really all in. You're 85% in, 90% on a good day, but never 100%, because 100% feels reckless. But here's the shift I'm trying to make. Maybe 100% is the only way it actually works. Maybe 85% love is just prolonged disappointment for both people. Maybe the only way to build something real is to stop protecting yourself from it, to stop managing your exposure, to stop treating love like a risk you minimize instead of a risk you take fully, consciously, with your whole chest. And yes, that means you might get hurt, you might lose, you might give everything and still watch it end. But at least you'll know you were there, you were present, you didn't cheat yourself out of the full experience because you were too afraid to feel it. I'm not saying throw caution to the wind. I'm not saying ignore red flags or stay in something unhealthy just because you're all in. I'm saying when you find something real, when you find someone who makes you better, who sees you fully, who meets you where you are and still chooses you, don't waste it by being half present. Don't let fear dictate your capacity for connection. Don't choose the safety of silence over the risk of being known. She taught me that without teaching me anything, just by being herself, just by showing me what it looked like to love without a safety net, to speak without a script, to trust without needing proof first. And I'm still learning. I'm still unlearning years of conditioning that told me emotional restraint was power, that mystery was attractive, that the person who revealed less controlled more. None of that is true. The person who reveals less just stays lonely longer. And I'm tired of being lonely in proximity to someone I love. I'm tired of being in the same room and still feeling separated by everything I'm not saying. So this is me practicing, saying the things I used to keep locked, naming what matters, honoring what I feel, without needing it to be perfect or polished or safe. This is me breaking the silence I built around my own heart. Not because anyone asked me to, but because I finally realized the cost of not breaking it. The cost is connection, presence, the fullness of love, and I'm not willing to pay that price anymore. Not for comfort, not for control, not for the illusion of being unaffected. Because being affected is the whole point. Being changed by someone, that's not weakness. That's proof you were actually there. There's a difference between knowing someone and being known by them. I knew her routines, her preferences, the way she took her coffee, the shows she rewatched when she needed comfort, the specific tone her voice took when something was bothering her but she wasn't ready to talk about it yet. I knew her on a surface level that felt deep because I paid attention. But being known, that required something I wasn't giving. It required me to let her see me the same way, to let her pass the curated version, to show her the parts I didn't show anyone. And that's where I struggled. I'm good at reading people. I've spent years studying human behavior, psychology, the patterns that drive decisions and relationships. But understanding people intellectually isn't the same as connecting with them emotionally. I could analyze her, predict her, understand her on paper, but could I sit with her in full vulnerability and let her do the same to me? Could I let her see the version of me that doubts, that fails, that doesn't have it all figured out? That was harder. That required me to stop performing competence and start practicing presence. And here's the thing, presence isn't passive. It's not just showing up physically, it's showing up emotionally, without an agenda, without trying to fix or teach or redirect. It's sitting in a moment that's uncomfortable and not rushing to make it comfortable again. It's hearing something you don't want to hear and not defending yourself immediately. It's letting someone be frustrated or sad or uncertain without needing them to resolve it quickly so you can feel better. Presence is one of the hardest things I've ever tried to practice because my default is action. My default is solution. My default is let me handle this so we can move forward. But sometimes moving forward isn't what's needed. Sometimes what's needed is just staying. She asked me once what I was afraid of, and I gave her a surface answer. Something about failure, or not reaching my potential, or letting people down. And she looked at me like she could see right through it. She said, "No, what are you actually afraid of?" And I didn't answer, because the real answer was too vulnerable to say out loud. The real answer was I'm afraid of being fully known and still being left. I'm afraid of giving everything and it not being enough. I'm afraid that the version of me, without the achievements, without the vision, without the output, that version isn't worth staying for. But here's what nobody told me. That fear doesn't go away just because you ignore it. It doesn't disappear because you keep busy or stay focused or refuse to think about it. It just sits there in every relationship, in every moment of intimacy, quietly shaping how much of yourself you're willing to give, how vulnerable you're willing to be, how deeply you're willing to let someone in. And until you name it, until you actually say it out loud to the person you're with, it controls you. It decides for you. It keeps you at a distance you don't even realize you're maintaining. Tell me something. When was the last time you told someone what you were actually afraid of? Not the acceptable fears, not the ones that make you look humble or self aware, the real ones, the ones that feel too raw to admit, the ones that if someone knew, they'd see you completely differently. Have you ever said those out loud? Or do you keep them buried, convinced that if you just manage them well enough, no one will ever have to see them? I kept mine buried, and every day I did, I created more distance between who I was and who she thought I was. And that distance, no matter how small, was still a gap. And that's when everything I believed fell apart. Again. Because I realized I was asking her to trust me with her fears while I kept mine locked away. I was asking her to be vulnerable while I stayed guarded. I was asking her to go first, to risk more, to show up fully while I played it safe. And that's not partnership, that's control. That's me managing the relationship in a way that protected my ego more than it protected us. Love isn't about managing your image. It's about dropping it. It's about letting someone see you when you're not impressive, when you don't have the answer, when you're scared or insecure or uncertain about the next move. And for someone like me, someone who's built a life on having clarity, on projecting confidence, on always knowing the next step, that kind of exposure felt like losing myself. But it's not. It's finding yourself, the real version, the one that exists underneath all the optimization and strategy and performance. I remember a night when everything fell apart. Not between us, just inside me. One of those moments where the weight of everything I was carrying finally caught up, and I didn't want her to see it. I didn't want her to see me that broken down, that overwhelmed, that human. So I pulled away. I went quiet. I told her I needed space to think, and she gave it to me. But the look in her eyes when I said it, I'll never forget it. It wasn't anger, it was hurt. The kind of hurt that comes from realizing the person you love doesn't trust you with their pain, that they'd rather carry it alone than let you hold it with them. And I justified it. I told myself I was protecting her, that she didn't need to deal with my problems, that I was being considerate by handling it on my own. But the truth is, I was protecting myself from being seen as weak, from needing help, from admitting that I couldn't handle everything. And in doing that, I sent her a message I never meant to send. I told her that she was allowed in my life, but not all the way in, that there were parts of me she didn't get access to, that I'd be there for her, but I didn't need her to be there for me the same way. Look at me for a second. If you're doing that right now, if you're keeping someone at arm's length while pretending you're close, stop. Stop telling yourself it's for their benefit. Stop convincing yourself that carrying everything alone makes you strong. It doesn't. It makes you isolated. It makes the person you love feel like they're not essential to your life, just adjacent to it. And eventually, that distance becomes the norm. You stop even noticing it's there. You just accept that this is how it is, that some parts of you will always be separate, that full intimacy isn't actually possible. But it is possible. It's just terrifying. It requires you to let go of the version of yourself you've been performing, to stop being the person who has it all together, and start being the person who's honest about when they don't. And that honesty, that raw, unfiltered honesty, that's where real connection lives. Not in the highlight reel, not in the version of you that's impressive, in the version that's real, that's struggling, that's trying and failing and trying again. That's the version someone can actually love, because it's the version that's true. She never asked me to be perfect. She just asked me to be present, to let her see me, to stop hiding behind productivity and vision and the next big thing, to sit with her and be a person, not a project. And I failed at that more often than I succeeded. But every time I did succeed, every time I let my guard down, every time I said something true even when it cost me, something shifted. The distance closed, the connection deepened, and I remembered why any of it mattered in the first place. Because here's what I've learned. You can build empires and change industries and accomplish things most people only dream about. But if you do it all while keeping the people you love at a distance, you'll end up successful and alone. You'll have everything you wanted and no one to share it with. Not because no one was there, but because you never let them all the way in. You never trusted them with the whole truth. You never gave them the chance to love the real you because you were too busy managing how they saw you. I don't want that anymore. I don't want to be the person who wins at everything except intimacy, who masters every skill except vulnerability, who builds incredible things but can't sustain incredible connection. And if you're reading this and you recognize yourself in what I'm saying, then maybe you don't want that either. Maybe you're tired of the performance, tired of the distance, tired of being close to someone and still feeling alone. Maybe you're ready to try something different, to show up differently, to love without a safety net, to be known instead of just impressive. It starts with one conversation, one honest sentence, one moment where you choose truth over comfort, where you say what you've been avoiding, where you name what you feel even though your voice might shake. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to start. And that start, that first crack in the armor, that's where everything changes. So here we are.
The place I never thought I'd be, speaking about something I kept sacred by keeping silent.
And the strange thing is, now that I'm here, now that I've said it all out loud, I don't feel exposed the way I thought I would. I feel lighter, like I've been holding my breath for years and finally remembered how to exhale. That's what silence does. It makes you forget that expression is actually relief. that saying what's true doesn't make you weaker, it makes you free. I'm not telling you to broadcast your private life. I'm not saying post everything, share everything, turn your relationship into content for consumption. That's not what this is about. This is about the difference between privacy and suppression, between protecting something precious and suffocating it with silence, between honoring someone quietly and forgetting to honor them at all. There's a version of privacy that's healthy, that's intentional, that creates sacred space. And then there's the version I lived in, where privacy became an excuse not to practice expressing love, where keeping things close meant keeping them small, where silence felt safer than the risk of being misunderstood. But what I've realized is this: being misunderstood by people who don't matter is a small price to pay for being fully understood by the one person who does. And I never gave her the full picture. I gave her pieces, moments, fragments of what I actually felt. And I thought that was enough because those moments were real. They were honest, but they weren't complete. And somewhere in the gaps between what I felt and what I said, doubt had room to grow. Not because she didn't trust me, but because I never gave her the full language of my love. I gave her actions, consistency, presence, but I didn't give her words. And words matter, not as much as action, but more than I ever admitted. You've been there. You've loved someone and assumed they knew. Assumed your presence was obvious, your commitment clear, your feelings implied. And maybe they did know, or maybe they just hoped they knew and spent quiet moments wondering if they were reading you right, if what you felt matched what they felt, if the love was mutual, or if they were just more expressive about it. That wondering, that uncertainty, that's what silence creates. Not always, but often enough that it's worth examining, worth asking yourself, am I protecting something by staying quiet, or am I just protecting myself from the vulnerability of saying it out loud? She deserved to hear it. She deserved to know that the quiet moments we shared weren't just comfortable for me, they were essential. That she wasn't just someone I spent time with, she was the reason I wanted to build something that lasted. That when I talked about the future, she was in every version of it. But I never said that, not directly, not in a way that left no room for doubt. I hinted, I implied, I showed up, but I didn't speak it into existence the way it deserved to be spoken. And that's when everything I believed fell apart, one final time. Because I realized the silence I was so proud of, the privacy, the discretion, the refusal to turn my relationship into a spectacle, that wasn't wisdom. That was fear. Fear of being vulnerable in a way I couldn't control. Fear that if I said too much, I'd lose the mystery, the upper hand, the version of myself that seemed untouchable. But love isn't about being untouchable. It's about being touchable, reachable, knowable. And I made myself unreachable by turning silence into a virtue, when really it was just avoidance. So why am I telling you this now? Why break the silence today? Because I finally understand something. The people we love deserve to be honored while they're here, not remembered fondly when they're gone, not appreciated in hindsight, not spoken about with regret after the chance to say it has passed. They deserve to know, in real time, in clear language, without ambiguity, that they matter, that they changed you, that loving them wasn't just a chapter in your life, it was the chapter that made everything else make sense. I don't know where she is now. I don't know if she'll ever hear this, or if it even matters to her anymore. But that's not why I'm saying it. I'm saying it because I need to practice being the kind of person who doesn't wait, who doesn't let fear dictate expression, who doesn't confuse emotional restraint with emotional maturity. I spent years thinking silence made me deep. It didn't. It just made me distant. And I'm done being distant from the things that matter. Have you told them? The person who changed you, the one who made you feel seen when everyone else just saw your output, the one who sat with you when you had nothing impressive to say, when you weren't solving problems or building things or moving toward the next milestone, when you were just you. Have you told them what they mean? Or are you waiting, waiting for the right moment, the right words, the right level of certainty? Because here's the truth: there's no right moment, there's only now. And now is always the moment you have. I used to think love was something you felt deeply and expressed carefully, that the depth was in the feeling, not the expression. But I was wrong. The depth is in both. Feeling without expressing is just internal experience. It's real for you, but it's invisible to them. And making it visible putting it into words, into gestures, into clear and undeniable language. That's not diluting the feeling. That's completing it. That's turning private truth into shared reality. And shared reality is where connection actually lives. So this is me, breaking the silence I built around my own capacity to love out loud. Not because the world needed to know, but because I needed to remember. I needed to prove to myself that I could do it, that I could talk about her without diminishing what we had, that I could honor something sacred by naming it instead of guarding it. That vulnerability wasn't the enemy, silence was. And if you take anything from this, let it be this. Don't wait until it's too late to say what matters. Don't let years pass before you practice expressing love the way it deserves to be expressed. Don't assume the people you love know how you feel just because you show up. Speak it. Name it. Let them hear it in your voice so there's no question, so there's no doubt. So years from now, if everything falls apart or if life takes you in different directions, at least they'll know. They'll know they weren't imagining it, that it was real, that they mattered in a way that didn't require interpretation. She taught me that, not by asking for it, just by being someone worth speaking about, someone worth honoring, someone worth breaking my own rules for. And if I never get the chance to tell her directly, at least I've said it now. At least I've proven to myself that I can, that the silence I was so committed to wasn't unbreakable. It was just a choice. And I'm choosing differently now. I'm choosing expression over protection, voice over guard, truth over comfort. And if that makes me vulnerable, so be it. Vulnerability is the price of connection, and connection is the only thing that's ever actually mattered. Everything else, the achievements, the vision, the impact, it all means nothing if you do it alone. If you keep the people you love at a distance, if you never let them hear what they meant to you in words that can't be misunderstood. So here it is. The thing I never said. The silence I finally broke. I loved her. I still do. And for the first time, I'm not afraid to let that be known. Not because it changes anything, but because it changes me. It makes me someone who doesn't hide behind privacy when what's really needed is presence. Someone who doesn't confuse emotional control with emotional courage. Someone who's willing to say the uncomfortable, vulnerable, unpolished truth, because the alternative, silence, costs too much. This is me, learning how to speak, learning how to honor, learning how to love out loud. And if you're still here, still reading, still feeling the weight of everything you haven't said to the person who matters, this is your sign. Say it. Today. Now. Before another moment passes. Before you convince yourself tomorrow is soon enough. It's not. The only time you have is now. And the only words that matter are the ones you're willing to risk everything to say. I never spoke about her until today. And now that I have, I understand what I've been missing. Not her validation, not the world's approval, just the freedom that comes from finally telling the truth, from breaking the silence I thought was protecting me, but was really just keeping me small. I'm done being small. I'm done hiding what matters. I'm done waiting for permission to honor the people who made me human. This is me, fully, finally. And if that's not enough, at least it's real.